Three, two, one, and welcome back to the SBH podcast. And in this podcast, I'm going to be talking about. I have a lot of topics I want to talk about, but I guess I'm going to be talking about just getting into the better part of the summer fishing, with just there being so many big fish around, and and the other thing I want to really get into is just the sheer frustration factor that I've had to deal with so far this season with different size fish, especially big ones. But anyway, I really wanted to get into this moon phase to start, I guess. And it all started, so I took last week off from doing anything else. So literally all I was doing was fishing, and I fished really, really hard. It all started off with those awesome topwater, 30 pounders, and then it, continued on into getting into closer to, or I guess the past 2 weeks, I should be saying, but it gets closer and closer to, the new moon as it was going. And as we were getting closer, the fishing was getting increasingly better. And I had one night where I hooked probably, 3 bass over 40 inches, and one was probably close to 40 pounds, and I lost all of them. And it's pretty tough for me to do that because last season I only lost one larger fish, and that fish was probably only 40 inches. And that's really tough on me because I just don't like losing fish in general. And it's one thing to lose one big fish one night of the season, but it's another thing to lose multiple large fish in one night, and it put me really into a bad mood. And I was just having to, deal with trying to, rebound from that mistake, and it was able to do it pretty quickly afterwards. The next day, I went out and I was able to get into probably a 45-inch bass that fought like nothing. Absolutely did not fight whatsoever. Hooked into him. Well, first of all, I guess the backstory is I was fishing and I was not getting anything, not even a touch. 4 hours later, hadn't got a single hit from any fish, not even schoolie. I actually don't even feel taps. All I feel is just dead weight. Like I'm just reeling, I'm reeling my eel in, and I just feel dead weight. And then I hook set, and then boom, it's a nice fish. But instead of doing its normal thing, it comes up on the surface, thrashes around a little bit, gets under the water, gets some purchase on the water with its tail, takes a run or two, and then boom, you land a fish. And I was even fishing with the GSB Skinner on my 200 Van Staal 50-pound Max Quattro, or Power Pro Max Quattro braid to a 60-pound leader with a Spro swivel and owner like size 8 circle hook or something like that. And so that was like the setup I was running that day, and I was getting absolutely no hits whatsoever. And then as I just continued, I just was believing so thoroughly that there was going to be a fish there because I lost so many in that same area the day before. Different tide. I was actually doing some swimming out to boulders in the wetsuit, which I didn't really understand how key a wetsuit is until really I put on a wetsuit and start swimming out to these boulders and start really hauling in some nice fish. And I'm so excited for this August because really, to me, August through September is probably the best fishing on Cape Ann. I feel like most people will agree with me about that. I just feel like that's when the bass are at their fattest. That's when the bass are at their biggest. And I end up catching 1 or 2 40-pound fish around then. Maybe I'll break 50 this year. 50 pounds. It would be pretty cool off the rocks. I screwed it up a few times that one day. I was fishing a Pumbaa Plug's Danny plug, like a newer Danny plug that he's messing around with this Danny plug, making it all nice. And I wasn't really thinking when he had what hooks he had on it, and he had a single tail hook, just a bucktail with a hook on the back. I don't really know what brand of hook it was or anything like that. I just was like, you know what, whatever. I wasn't expecting a whole hell of a lot, but I knew I was fishing in some heavy cover because I like to fish Danny's in Boulder Fields. That's my favorite place to fish Danny's, and I was fishing in a spot with heavy cover and heavy current. And I hooked one fish on actually a blurple wobbler, a Puma Plugs wobbler, and I pulled hooks on that pretty quickly. But I got it up, like I hooked into it, felt heavy, came up to the surface, thrashed a little bit, and shook the hooks. You know, it happens. Couldn't really tell how big the fish was, so I was like, okay, whatever. You know, probably a nice fish because it felt heavy, definitely over 35 inches, if not over 40 inches. And that's just me just gauging by the weight of this fish. And then the next fish I hooked, I cast it out right by this group of boulders that's a little bit further offset, and I dig this Danny plug down into the water. It takes like 3 or 4, cranks on my reel, things wobbling in there, and it stops, hook into this thing. I kid you not, you almost pulled me into the water because when you hook a really big, there's 2 different stages to a really big fish. You hook a really big fish and it'll come up to the surface and thrash around, but if you hook like a gorilla size fish, you hook into that thing and it doesn't move and doesn't come up to the surface, that's when you know it's a serious fish. And that's how you know it's probably somewhere in that 40-pound range or getting close to. And I'm not going to say it was, 30, 40 pounds, but who knows how big that fish was really. But yeah, we're going to call it, somewhere in the mid-30s pounds because I couldn't believe that it would be anything less than that. And I could believe that it could be more than that, but I'm not going to even go there in my mind. But, hooked into it, had really tight drag on my Van Staal, straightened my hook out immediately. Then I reeled it in, cast it back out 3 or 4 more times, boom, hooked another fish, and that fish started to peel a little bit of drag. It was probably 45 inches because I actually saw this one. I was able to raise him up a little bit, and he wasn't too far out. And yeah, he was probably 40, 45 inches, like in that range. Definitely not smaller than 40 though. It was like a nice solid fish. And yeah, that was tough losing that one too. And then I kind of just lost my mind and got really upset. Then the bite died, like completely cut off, no more hits. So I was just trying to work through getting that, and that was angry time. And I was trying to figure out why, and then I wanted to fish the Danny plug again in the morning, didn't work out. One thing led to another. That night I had really small eels, the wind direction had changed, like everything was different. I was like, screw it, it's a cold front now, it's like everything was different in the next day. And then I got out there and managed to squeeze one 45-inch bass. I didn't even weigh or measure the fish. I don't know, it was as big as the bass that I got on top water earlier in the week, and that was 45 inches, 30 pounds. So like, who knows? I never took it out of the water. I just dragged them, in like further into the boulders and took some pictures with them, just lifting them maybe a foot out of the water back in, revived them all nice, and boom, kicked off. So super happy with that. Anytime that I can release fish and have them survive and be super healthy, I'm super stoked when that happens. And then it's tough because I had this whole mindset when I'm like, I've been fishing a lot during the day now. After getting a bunch of those bass on topwater, I've been getting follows by like 40-inch bass and seeing them cruising in this area all day. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to fish this place at night, and it just never's panning out for me, which is really frustrating. And yeah, I have interesting thoughts about that. Really, I found that the bass need to be in schools to have that competition to get them to say, I need to eat that food before, the other fish does. And that's when you really get those big feeds of big bass acting like they're small fish and really crushing the bait. And I've been throwing mostly Pumbaa plug, like the Pumbaa pencil in the smallest size, and I've been throwing the Magnum Walker, and both in yellow over white. And that's just, it's been killing it. I got countless bass over 30 inches and a few 35s. And then I've had, a few 40, like I hooked multiple bass that were over 45 inches on that. I've lost them I pulled hooks on one of them. But it's tough because this season I pulled a lot of hooks on a lot of fish, but I've gotten a lot of redemption on a lot of fish. By like that time, I casted the second cat, like literally reeled it in, casted it back out, boom, hooked into another monster. So that didn't really, get me that angry because the second fish that ate it was even bigger than the first one. But the one that I lost on that Danny plug really hurt. So I got 6X strong treble, and it was size 6, I believe, and I put a big split ring on it, just like solid, just one hook, and then I tied just a little tag for the back of it, or flag, I guess you could say. Just no hook, but just to give it a little bit more lifelike action, like a tail. And I've been fishing that a bit, but I do believe I'm gonna get more action out of that. As far as like I'm gonna get some bigger fish from that, but I kind of want to talk about really what you should be looking for during the summer when you're trying to target these bigger fish, because this is, like, for me, one of the most productive times of the season. I know that a lot of you guys can replicate this even if you're further south than I am, and if you're further north, I guess. Either way, like when the water temps are starting to get warmer, you have water temps that are getting to the low to mid 70s, which they rarely do around here, but they're getting there. There's a few days where the water temp was definitely had to be 73, 73 was probably the highest. I know it was 69 for a few days, but yeah, I mean, that's like kind of the sweet spot for me. I feel like that's when the bass are really big and aggressively feeding. But even if it's getting warmer, that you need to like play the wind switches. So like the whole goal is to find cool, clean water the best you can. And what I mean by clean water is it can have seaweed in it, but the salinity of the water the water itself needs to be super clear. And when the water's super clear, it doesn't hold as much heat and it tends to be cooler, and the bass tend to be there. That's where the big bass are going to be when the water temperature is at its highest, and that's what I've been really trying to chase, is those cool, clean water. And I like to chase it right as that wind starts to switch back around. So like if it was blowing north and it starts to switch to the south, then I want to be somewhere where I'm fishing on a south, like facing point, or something like that. And I've been doing so well off the rocks this season in general. I mean, it's my homeland. I feel like that's where I like to really, that's where I put in work all season long, is off the rocks. That's my go-to spots, even in the spring. But I feel like I didn't utilize the spring as best as I could this year. I feel like I kind of wasted one of these moon phases by losing so many fish. It's not over yet necessarily. It's just that so what I did was doing a lot of wetsuiting out to these rocks, and I have a camera guy that's doing the same thing. But as you know, salt water and camera gear doesn't mix all the time, and we don't know for sure, but we might have broken our flash, and we might have broken our light, our big light. So dealing with that stuff. That's why I'm not really fishing tonight per se. I'm also tired from grinding so hard all last week and into this week, and really trying to get on those bigger fish. The wind's not the greatest. The tide's tough because I'd have to be doing some major swimming. I mean, everything is just like not where I want it to be. But when you get thrown curveballs, you're gonna have to try to figure some stuff out on the fly. And I've been trying to do a lot of that this week with the fishing, and it's been getting better. I've been getting better at patterning down these bigger fish, but at the same time, I feel like I'm still not utilizing the fishing as best I can. And it's interesting because I wanted to talk a little bit about this too. I've been doing a lot of eeling, and I've been getting all the tackle stores that I'm going to have small eels, and I'm like, I hate fishing small eels. You catch only schoolies. It's tough. But I've been catching some monster bass on little eels, smaller eels, and I don't necessarily like throwing small eels, especially when the water is really rocking. But I do think that there's something to be said to throwing a smaller, like 10-inch eel when the water is super flat, calm. And I was fishing a spot that with like the wind just switched back around to blowing onshore, And the water was super flat. There's some swells, but it was nothing crazy. The water was cool with a little bit of seaweed, but it was quiet. It was super quiet. Nothing was really moving around. I couldn't see anything visually. But I did know that there was probably some bass around in that area just because of what I'd seen during the day, the previous day, and I knew that there's so many big bass because I'm sitting up on these rocks looking down at them, and I'm seeing 20-pound bass cruising across the surface in schools. And that's what you want to see. That's the biomass that you want to see cruising around your rocks. And that's, it's really good. And sometimes you can get those bass to eat during the day. It's a lot harder to do. But at night, you get those bigger solitary fish. And if there's 20-pound fish swimming around schools, that there's going to be a few 45-inch bass swimming around solitary or with one buddy. And that's what they're going to be dealing with. That's what you're going to be dealing with that night. And that's what I was hoping to run into. And I think I did. But at the same time, that was a solitary fish by itself. Not even schoolies were around it. It was just cruising that area looking for bait. And this is an interesting time of year because you have pretty much all the bait around that these bass need. And so they're doing these, what I've been talking about for a while now, is they're staging in spots. Now they've moved in and now they're staging up. And this is the most fun time of year because this is the time of year you can catch the biggest bass. And are going to it, like the full moon in this next full moon in like August, I think it's like August 4th or something, is probably going to be, well, I know for a fact it's when I caught I'm pretty sure it is. Maybe I don't know for a fact. But it was when I caught my biggest fish of the season last year, which always makes for, an interesting time because I know that there's such big fish around. And I think I caught, in total in August, probably maybe 10 fish over 40 pounds, 5, 10, because I got 5 that were over 40, and then I had a few that were like 41, 39s. So like I got like a bunch of that size fish. I would have to look back, but I'm pretty sure I had around 10 over 40 in August alone. So that's like, for me, that's really a big time for me. And I tried to be throwing mostly plugs, but I hate pulling hooks on fish. And I know that with a single circle hook on an eel, you hook into that fish, he's not going to be shaking your hook, or pulling it for that matter. And that's what I'm most worried about with fishing with plugs this time of year, because you get those 1 or 2 big fish and you don't want to blow your shot at that. And I like to fish those like 16-inch eels, 20-inch eels this time of year. And then as the season progresses and you get into that like late August time frame, then I'm throwing the biggest eels I can buy, because that's when the bass are like, give me all the food. And you tend to really weed out everything and you get those trophies, and that's what you look for. And you got to throw big twigs to get those bass to come up and crush them, but and be able to throw the eel, obviously. But still, like I caught bass on 24-inch eels last year, like 45-inch bass on 24-inch eels, and it's one of those things that it's that one hit, you get that one hit all night, but it's the one you want. And it's still really awesome to catch fish like I am but I've gotten a lot of that like mid 40 size bass. I want to get like a 48. I haven't gotten a 48-inch bass this season. I don't think I did last season this time either. By this time, really all of those bigger fish they're cookie cutter size, but they're all monsters, and they all came in August. So, and I was chasing that wave sweep in that weather changing between storms, and that's what you want when you get those not big, but you get thunderstorms that roll through and they kick up wind and they kick up the waves, and then you get those like decent sized waves that are moving through that are getting the bass all stirred up, and then you fish the wave sweep where you have fairly deep water and a good amount of current moving through an area, and then you drop your eel and you let it swim down into that, and that's when it gets crushed. And the only thing that I can really replicate that with is a Danny plug, because the Danny plugs sit so well. The diving Danny plugs, not on the surface, but if you can get a Danny that dives down and you can get it to really dive down into big surf, I really have good luck with that. Like that's when I get my best luck, because those fish are kind of hugging the bottom there. They're hugging that structure because they don't want to be right up on the surface. And that's where the bigger eels come into play, because you get those big eels, they're strong enough to swim really far down into the rocks and the structure where the bass are, and that's when you end up catching those monsters. And I'm looking forward to that, but I feel like we're in the time that I've been talking about all winter long, and the time that, this season's going so quick, it's mind-boggling. Like, we're already over halfway through the season, and feel like it just started. And I've been having a blast just catching so many nice solid fish and learning so much, and I feel like I'm just still like out of my mind about how much there is to learn about fishing. Like, there's so much more to learn, not like about everything. Like, there's so much more to learn. It's almost intimidating. There's that much to learn, and the only way to learn that stuff is to do. And that's how I built myself. And that's how I get a lot of questions about, I'm not really catching fish. How can I catch more fish? And a big part of that is just doing it. You gotta get out there, and you gotta be fishing, and you gotta trial and error stuff. If you're not catching fish, doing something, learn more about fishing that area, try different things, and generally you'll eventually find something that will work for at least smaller fish, and then you can work your way up from there. As I like to tell people when they're starting out, like, don't fish for monster striped bass to start. Fish until you catch so many schoolies that you have, fish until you caught so many schoolies that you don't care to catch any more schoolies, and then start fishing for big fish. And that's when you make those transitions into catching bigger bass. And because what it is a lot of catching nothing to get that one fish. And what I've been trying to portray through my podcasts here is, like, I catch big fish, yes, but the amount of skunk trips that I go through, or that the trips that I get 120-inch bass in 5 hours of fishing, and then nothing, and then maybe you have that little shot in prayer that you'll get that trophy. And that's the one thing, like, I might have better luck getting into groups of medium-sized fish that are those 30, 35-inch bass, and I could get on bites like that, but I also just want to catch those big fish, 30-plus pound bass. Any bass that's in the 30 pounds is like, I would catch 30-pound bass for the rest of my life and not care if I was catching, like, if that would be like the one size. Like, if I could pick like one size fish, it'd be like a 30-pound bass, because that's when they get really fun. They fight hard, and they just are big and powerful, and that's what's so awesome about fishing for bass of that size. In other news, we dropped the second episode of the Striped Bass Hunt Show. It went really well. And now I guess you guys know that we're working with Lamaglass, and we're continuing to work with Puma Plugs, and they sponsored the show. And I'm super happy to be, able to work with like a rod company in general, but not only that, but be able to work with the rods that I've been using regardless and would continue to use even if they said no. And that's just so awesome to me that they're so cool. And I just want to be, I'm just so grateful that I have the opportunity to do something like this. And that the stars have aligned with, the whole awful coronavirus has actually given us time to do what we're doing. And I think that, like, if you haven't seen it, you have to check it out, because it's only getting better from here. Each episode is, each episode's entertainment level is double, tripling each time. The bass are getting bigger, and it's just, the filming is getting more complex. Everything's getting better about it. I'm learning. I know I'm not the best at narrating things, but that's getting better. Like, all of this is getting better, and it's tough because the whole point of this show is like, I'm going to go collab with a bunch of really cool people. We're going to do a whole bunch of fishing, but it kind of got all thrown away when it came to, okay, now we have the coronavirus, we can't do that, but I get more time to fish. So, there's, like that level of give or take. You get more time to fish, but you can't fish with as many cool people just because, I want to collab with people in New York, New Jersey, and I can't do that because of the coronavirus. It would just be impractical. And, hopefully hopefully it gets big enough to where people enjoy it enough that we might be able to do another season. But this is really a trial run, and this is to show everybody that this is what I can do as far as creating content wise. And I hope everybody's enjoying what we're doing, and I hope that it starts getting some more eyeballs on it, because I feel confident that if people, if enough people saw it, they would really enjoy it, and people seem to be really enjoying it. So I'm super happy for everybody's super kind words. I've gotten some fantastic DMs, and if you're one of those people, thank you so much about all the support about the show. I mean, obviously we wouldn't be doing this if you guys weren't liking it and and we're having a blast doing it. So it's really just the best of both worlds for everyone involved. And I just wanted to say that, I guess, really I wanted to talk about that, but I was like, I'll save everything and all the announcements, like we're working with Lamb Glass, and obviously we were continuing to work with Puma Plugs on this, and I mean, it's just such a crazy season. It just feels like it's going so fast. Now it's gonna be over, and then it's that whole just cycle of just endlessness here, and I don't want to lose these fish again. I feel like they just came here and we got halfway done before we're going to be losing the fish again. Although we do have probably the best part of the season to come, and it's just, there's so much to learn in every location. On the beaches, on the estuaries, it's mind-blowing, and I think that we really had a good season so far, just by the setup of how the spring was awful, but we got a lot of bait in, and then finally the bass show up in July like I've been hoping and praying. But even though I was predicting earlier than they were, I had a sneaking suspicion that they were going to really start showing up in numbers in mid-July, and sure enough, mid-July rolled around, boom, we got a big push of 25 to 40 pound bass, and we got those fish that were down in New York, in New Jersey for so much of the spring, and we finally got a good push of them, and that was so much fun. I put a question up on my Instagram about fishing off the rocks, because I've been doing a lot of that. I've been doing a lot of wetsuiting. I'm going to get even more in depth into the wetsuiting as the season progresses. And I've been having a lot of fun wetsuiting, just doing a lot of swimming. Oh, and Joe from Puma Plugs did come, and we fished. We didn't have a crazy, we didn't catch a lot of fish. We fished one day, we fished really late, but everything was going against us, it was just bad. Everything didn't go our way, but he was able to catch a 34-inch bass during the middle of the day, so that was pretty cool. And I mean, it wasn't like a total bust, but we didn't really bang him up like we've done in the past, and but it is what it is. Okay, so I guess I'm gonna try to get into some of these questions here, because let's get into some questions here. Okay, what do we have? How many questions do we got here? Oh, we got a fair amount. Here's the problem is, I do this thing where I put the questions up and I do them right before I do the podcast. So these have only really been up for 45 minutes ish, and there's going to be more people to see them after it. So I guess what I'm doing in general is I'm asking the questions. If I don't get to your question, I will get to it in the next podcast if it comes in after this podcast is over. And bear with me because the writing is small. Okay, by rocks do you mean jetty? I mean, yes. Anything off the rocks is in my wheelhouse, I guess you could say, but I guess there's not really a real question other than that to me, unless you had a follow-up question, which I can just DM you about. Okay. How often does your braided line get frayed on the rocks? Do you regret, or do you retie, your leader very often? That's a good question. It's interesting because it's tough. That's a tough question to answer, because it really depends on location wise. If I'm fishing in really shallow water with a bunch of boulders around, it does get frayed fairly often, even from schoolies swimming me into the rocks. It's kind of unavoidable. That's why I fish such heavy gear. People are always like, why do you fish such heavy gear? That's why I fish such heavy gear, because even schoolies are getting me into the rocks, and I don't want to be retying every single time. That's why I'm fishing 80-pound fluorocarbon sometimes, depending on the spot. I do like fishing like my sweet spot. I feel like I feel most confident fishing 60-pound fluoro. I ended up last year fishing 60-pound most of the year, just because I can tie and groove clench knots super easy with it, and yeah, it's just not really it's not that difficult for me to throw, and I feel like it's still on that like upper end of strong, before I'm getting into like we're fishing with rope, like as in 80-pound fluoro. But it happens, and I would say, if and really the other day I was like fishing certain line, and if I see it starting to get a little fuzzy, I'll cut 6 feet off of it or whatever, and that's just part of the game, I guess. Yeah. What's the water temp up there? Water temp's been, as I've been talking about, I guess a little bit, from anywhere from 65 to 74 degrees. It's been fluctuating depending on the wind direction and weather, but it's been in that range. I had in spots as well. Like if you're fishing in the estuaries, you could be fishing almost 80-degree water, but if you're fishing off the rocks and deep cliff areas, it can be 65, 67, like that range. But I feel like most of the time it's been between 68 and 70. So that's probably the rough estimate. But yeah, I mean, the water temp this time of year is perfect. That's why we have such good fishing this time of year. Do you ever use cut bait like mackerel or pogie? I haven't used cut bait in probably a year or two. I used to do it a fair amount, just at ease when I was younger. But I think that if you really want to catch a monster fish, you can use chunk pogie, and in certain areas, I wouldn't fish it off the rocks. I'd fish off sandy beaches, but in certain areas and certain times of the year, a chunk pogie could probably pull you a 50-pound bass, or mackerel for that matter. I don't like fishing mackerel as much just in general, but yeah, mackerel is also awesome chunk too. Probably the biggest fish I've ever caught on chunk bait is 35 inches. So yeah, I mean, I'm no expert on chunking bait, but I've caught some decent sized fish off of them. What are the best times? What do you look for when spotting locations? What are the best times? Best times to fish in general, I don't care where you are and what structure you're fishing, is early morning sunrise, sunset, and then all nighttime is the best time to fish. And then what am I looking for when I'm finding a rocky location? I'm looking for white water. White water is key. If you're looking on Google Earth and you see a whole section of like boulder field that looks really, really good, but there's that one like spot that you see like white water crashing over rocks, that's where I'm going to be at, because that's where the bass tend to congregate, because it's, especially on Cape Ann, there's so much good looking structure, but it's hard to find that like one little chunk. And that's the same thing with fishing off of sandy beaches, and yet I don't really know what is good looking structure off sandy beaches quite yet. So I mean, I do, like, there's obviously things that I figure out, but like it's kind of in that scenario, it's like that one rip on a giant sandy beach of just like holes and stuff versus is like, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's obviously other areas across the rocks that the bass could be, but if you get that one area that has condensed white water in either an indent or a cove-like thing, that's where the bass are going to be. It's going to funnel them in there, and where that white water is where the bass are going to stage up. That's what I really look for, and that was an awesome question, because I feel like a lot of people are wondering about that, because it's probably one of the most important things. And I always say, even if there's not white water there, look for the most disturbed area with waves, like where the waves are building up the highest and stuff, because that's where it goes from deep to shallow, and that's where the bass will sit, where that waves are sweeping through an area. And even if it is fairly shallow, you'd be surprised. Bass will stage in those areas, even if it is shallow. Okay. Do you enjoy it, or do you just sacrifice for the fish? I honestly think that there's nothing more hardcore than fishing off the rocks. You feel like the most badass fisherman in the world. If I could fish off a sandy beach though and have the same success, I would. I would do that over fishing off the rocks. It's a lot of effort. It can be a lot of fun, but it is a lot of effort and it's very dangerous. And yeah, there's a lot of elements to it. But if I could literally fish off a sandy beach or off of an estuary and get the same successes that I do off the rocks, then I would never fish off the rocks. So yeah, I guess that, it is a sacrifice that I make because there are fish there. And I feel like it's probably the easiest structure to learn, I'd say, just because it's the easiest structure to learn, I think, pretty much. Other than probably estuaries, which is also fairly easy to learn, but at the same time, it's hard to find where giant fish will be in an estuary. It's a little bit easier off the rocks. But yeah. Can you fish bucktails in the rocks without getting snagged? Yes. I've had a lot of really good days on bucktails in the rocks. Excuse me. And I've caught, there's been days in the spring and the fall where you're catching them every cast on bucktails. I don't fish bucktails that often. I don't fish bucktails when I'm targeting the biggest fish in the world. But I do think that there are times where bucktails definitely come in handy. And there are times where I would be like, would probably want to be fishing a bucktail right now because the bass seem to be deeper and the water's so stirred up. Something about it that just bucktails just catch fish. And something about it. What's your favorite soft plastic color? I don't fish soft plastics. I don't fish soft plastics that often, but when I do, they're pretty much exclusively white, and that's just because I don't fish them that often. And that's because it's mostly the color that they are. White is just a great color. I just think that it just catches fish. I fished chartreuse colors before, pink. Never fished black. I've heard black is a great color. I have some buddies that love fishing black soft plastics, but yeah, I guess that's pretty much it as far as questions go. That is it. Not pretty much. That is it as far as questions go. Yeah, I guess I really like that question about the structure, because structure is, in fishing in general, is really hard to find productive spots. And it's funny because there are areas that look so good, but there's just so much ground to cover that it's so difficult to figure out where the big fish are going to be. And it's all about learning it. And I've always found that the best times to really catch big fish is the best times to really catch big fish. And it's tough for me to go looking for more spots when you know you'd be catching big fish in one area. That's just sacrificing perfect tides and moons of areas, and I don't like doing that, but at the same time, I feel like sometimes it's necessary during certain times of the year, especially early in the season when I don't feel like I'm sacrificing too much off the rocks to go break into the estuary game, which I feel like I've tapped into the most, more than fishing off the sandy beaches, just because I fished off the sandy beaches a handful of times this season. It's so big and so intimidating that I just need some more guidance around it. I do understand certain areas are more productive and so much stuff changes on sandy beaches just because it's soft structure, and soft structure changes year to year. And that's the other good thing about fishing boulder fields is they rarely change. You find a pocket that holds fish, you're going to be catching fish there for years to come unless something major changes in the fishery. And that's what I've come to find, and I'm glad that that's the case because I don't know what I would do if it wasn't. Although it's interesting because there are times where their bass are in that one section, and then the next year they're just a little bit further over, and the next year they're just a little bit further over, and it's one of those things that on Cape Ann in general, it just there's you can this is the thing, you have access points in multiple spots along Cape Ann, and it's just about traversing territory. And if you get good at finding your way into areas as legally as you can get to some real honey holes. And I feel like 99.9% of my best producing spots are very highly private, and they're multiple, like a lot of them are like an hour walk, 35 minutes, 45-minute walk, like traverse across rocks. So that's why I don't like. I have a lot of people DM me and be like, I've never seen you fishing in this area. I know you fish around here. And it's like, yeah, because I don't fish where anybody else fishes, because I put in a lot of time and effort to go climb across rocks to get to certain areas. And that's what makes it more fulfilling when you catch a 45-inch bass off the rocks versus, in a well-known area, just because you did all that legwork to do it. Yeah, there's certain areas that I fish that other people fish, but it's a small percentage of my spots that other people fish. So yeah. Anyway, I don't know how long we've been going for. I normally check the time before we start, but I forgot to do it this time. So I hope this podcast isn't too short. I feel like I covered I covered a good amount of stuff in this podcast, and really what I wanted to talk about is just, it's tough because I feel like I talk about a lot of the same stuff, but I really like that question at the end there, and that really kind of gave me, a good idea. And it's like little nuggets of information's always good, and what to look for to find good structure off the rocks is probably going to be what this is called. And that's why I like doing the Instagram questions, just because like they're so good. And a lot of them have me think about them. And I've had multiple questions where I've spent hours pondering them after the podcasts are over, thinking about things, and it's changing my evolution in fishing and why I'm thinking and when I think about things, for better or worse, I guess. And so does Instagram in general. That's why it's such a powerful tool. And yeah, I just think that there's so much more to learn even off the rocks for me, and there's so much different structure. And what I've come to realize is that there's certain areas on Cape Ann where you have these rocks that have minimal current, and then you have and are more I guess I don't know how you could say this, but they're not as smooth and like quarry like, because there's certain areas that they mined like quarry and mined, I guess, I don't know if that's the right word to use, but they dug quarries in, and those areas are very flat rocks, smoother rocks. Not smooth, but like they're not as like bumpy and jagged, and I feel like I tend to not catch as many fish in those areas, and versus the areas that have these more jagged rocks and stuff. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but reading current is difficult off the rocks in certain scenarios. Certain scenarios, you cast your plug out and it'll land in the water, and then it'll go, and you're like, okay, that makes sense. But then there's other areas where it's like super subtle and it's really hard to tell. And wave sweep plays a big role into it, learning that area. But sometimes you'll have one current move one way and then start moving the other way and then moving back, and that's kind of like a washing machine effect that I also think is very productive for big fish, because I think the fish just sit like a weather vane, just turning into the current each time. They're just waiting for bait to just go across their face, and then poof, they smash it. Yeah, this is probably the most exciting time of the year for me, and it just keeps continuing, and it keeps going, and it keeps getting better. And I would have had one of my best days of the whole season if I had even landed one of those fish, because I probably would have broke 40 pounds this season, and it's frustrating. But the grind doesn't stop. You got to keep fishing, and you got to keep putting in those hours for those few moons that you got left in the season that are going to produce big fish, which we'll get through probably September and into October. I think early October is when I ended up losing 40-inch bass on Cape Ann. But that's really what I'm going to be doing and following that bait like I was talking about in that other podcast. That's been producing well for me too. I've been finding some bigger bait schools around, and that's where I've been seeing those schools of like 20-pound bass chasing them. And that's when you can get into those better topwater bites. And yeah, it really has been changing the game a lot for me. And I've been throwing those small 6-inch pencils, or 6.5-inch Pumbaa, small Pumbaa pencils. Have just been money for me. They walk well, they catch fish, but I do think that they're not as. I've been getting most of my monster fish on my on the Magnum Walker, and the Magnum Walker just produces like ridiculously. And yeah, that's, I guess, pretty much it for this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and it's kind of low-key. I'm a little bit low on energy right now just because I've been grinding so hard for the past bunch of days, and that's why, this is literally going to be recorded Wednesday today. It's being recorded, and it's going to be put out sometime tonight, and I'll maybe make a post on it on my Instagram if I remember. But anyway, thank you guys for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.